She was barefoot in the snow when he found her, arms curled around her belly like she could somehow hold in the life leaking from her skin. Her lips were blue, her breath barely visible, and her eyes fluttered open only when the shadow of his horse stretched across her broken body. She didn't speak right away. She just blinked at the figure above her, like he was some final vision sent to carry her gently across death's threshold. But Chaza dismounted without a word. He knelt beside her, the steam of his breath rising in soft clouds between them. Her dress hung in tatters, her ribs stark beneath frostbitten skin, one wrist twisted and swollen, blooming purple. No coat, no boots, just a satchel clutched tightly beneath her, as if even death wouldn't dare take it from her grip. When he reached for her hand, she tried to speak. Nothing came at first. Only a cracked croak, then a whisper so faint it might have been the wind itself. He leaned closer. Her lips brushed his ear, and what she said stopped his breath cold. He took the baby. That was all. Then her body gave out. But Chaza was already moving, wrapping her in the thick buffalo cloak he carried on his saddle. Not because she'd asked, not even because he'd meant to help her. It was something else. Something in her voice had carried not just desperation, but something unfinished. A story half told. A bond she refused to break. He lifted her like reeds gathered from riverbanks and mounted his horse again, holding her against his chest, lending her his warmth, trying to keep death from closing its grip just yet. The trail back to his winter camp lay 2 ridges east, but instead he turned south toward an old hidden hut once used by his grandfather for fasting. It was quieter there, safer, and if she didn't survive, the wind would carry her name with dignity. He didn't ask her name, not yet. He just laid her in the warmest corner of the shelter, fed the fire with his own breath, melted snow between his palms to moisten her lips, and waited. Time moved strangely. Her body trembled in cycles, heat burning through her like a fevered tide, then ebbing until she turned pale as the snow outside. Still, her hand never released the satchel. Even unconscious, her fingers clenched it with a kind of desperate authority, as if the satchel itself held the line between life and death. Only near nightfall did she stir again. One breath, a single word, wagon wheel, then silence. Chaza didn't sleep. He didn't pray either. Instead, he stared at the door like the wind might whisper answers if he listened hard enough. Somewhere out in that white wilderness, a man had taken a child and left a woman to die. And now that her voice had found a listener, it would not go unanswered. By morning, the fever had broken, but it had left her pale and hollow-eyed, her breath light as a thread. Chaza crushed elderroot and pine needles into a thick broth, feeding her in slow, careful spoons. Only when her fingers relaxed, just barely, did he dare unwrap the satchel she guarded. Inside were 2 things. A torn strip of soft blue baby blanket, stained with something dark and dried, and a leather-bound Bible, edges worn and brittle with cold. Inside the cover, a name, Grace Alcott. He whispered it once, testing it, as if the syllables might stir her back to life. But she didn't wake. That night, her eyes fluttered open, wild, unfocused, but alive. "The baby," she croaked. "He said he'd keep him. If I died." Chaza moved closer. "Who?" Her lips trembled. "Harlan Bishop. He said I owed him for the wagon ride. I begged him to stop so I could rest. He tied me to a tree, took the baby, said I was too weak to follow." Her voice broke. Tears filled her eyes. "He left me to die so he wouldn't have to share food." She coughed and tried to sit, but Chaza's hand gently eased her back. "You're not dead," he said, "but he will be if he kept his word." Her eyes widened. "You'd go after him?" Chaza didn't answer. He simply added more wood to the fire, then stepped outside into the deepening night. In the snow, he knelt beside the hut and pressed a calloused hand to the frozen ground. With one finger, he drew a slow circle into the snow, his people's way of calling for clarity. That night, as Grace slept, he sharpened his knife and checked the straps on his saddle. Grace stirred only once more. "I don't know if my baby's even alive," she whispered. Chaza turned toward her. "You said he'd keep the baby if he died." "Yes." "Then you're alive, so he'll come back, or I'll find him." It wasn't a promise. It was a decision. Grace stared at him, this quiet man with dark eyes that said more than any voice could. She'd been a stranger in too many places. But for once, she didn't feel the need to explain her pain. Chaz had seen it, not with pity, but with purpose. By the third night, she could stand with help. "Why are you doing this?" she asked as he packed a small satchel. He looked at her, then at the satchel, then back, "Because you whispered and no one else heard." Then he mounted and rode into the snow, following the trail of the man who thought he'd stolen from a ghost. The trail was faint, but not invisible. Shallow wagon tracks, hoof prints, the occasional drop of something dark that hadn't frozen clean. Chaza rode alone, bow slung across his back, knife at his side. He didn't ride fast. He rode right, pausing often, reading the signs, bent branches, scattered ash, careless remnants of someone who thought they wouldn't be followed. He found the first true sign near a stream half frozen in the silence. A cloth diaper, soaked stiff, folded, not tossed. That meant care. That meant the baby was still alive. The knowledge steadied Chaz's breath, but it darkened his heart. A man who could leave a woman to die would not treat a child with tenderness. The next night, he found a wagon, tipped in a ditch near a bluff. Smoke curled from its chimney pipe. He approached silently, on foot. Through a crack in the canvas, he saw firelight. A pan, a man with broad shoulders, tangled beard, a rifle resting in his lap. No sign of the child. He waited until nightfall, then crept around the back. A soft whimper, barely louder than wind, cut through the crackling fire. Behind the wagon, tucked into a crate lined with fur, was a child, barely moving, wrapped in what little warmth remained. Chaza didn't hesitate. He lifted the crate as gently as a prayer and stepped back into the trees. But the baby whimpered louder now. A voice bellowed from the wagon. "That you, girl? I told you." The rest was lost in a shouted curse as Harlan stumbled out, rifle in hand. He didn't see Chaza at first, not until an arrow hissed into the snow at his feet. He froze. Chaza stepped from the trees, silent, calm, unreadable. "You!" Harlan spat. "You one of hers?" Chaza said nothing. He held the child close and pointed to the west. "Go," he said. "You've got till I count to 3. "You threatening me?" Harlan sneered. "That baby's mine now." She owed. Chaza stepped forward, his stare sharper than any blade. The next arrow would miss. Harlan hesitated, then laughed bitterly and lowered his gun. "She ain't worth it anyway," he muttered, retreating toward the wagon. Chaza didn't watch him go. He touched the child's cheek. Still warm, still alive. Then he turned east, riding back toward the woman who'd whispered into the storm and been heard. Grace saw him before she believed it. She'd hobbled outside, using a branch as a crutch, her ribs still aching. She'd stare at the white horizon for hours, praying without speaking. And then, like a shape carved from the frost, Chaz appeared, walking beside his horse, holding something swaddled in furs to his chest. Her knees gave out. She didn't cry. Not yet. She simply folded into the snow, like the pain that kept her upright had finally loosened. Chaz knelt beside her, placing the bundle in her arms. Her fingers shook so hard she almost couldn't open it. Then she saw his face, red from cold, eyes blinking hard, one mitten missing. Her heart cracked open. "Eli," she whispered. The baby stirred. His eyes blinked slow, as if struggling to see through layers of fear and memory. "Mama's here," she said. "Mama's here." Chaza stood back, but she reached for him. "Wait," she breathed. "What happened? Did he?" Chaza shook his head. "He left." He knew someone was watching now. She looked into Chaza's face, the blood on his knuckles, the tension in his jaw. "You didn't kill him." He said nothing, but she knew, and somehow that meant more than if he had. The next few days passed in a strange, almost holy peace. Grace barely let Eli leave her arms. She fed him broth, drop by drop from cracked lips. She hummed lullabies from a life buried far behind her. Chaza hunted rabbits, built fires, spoke only when spoken to. But when he sat beside the flames, sharpening his blade, she felt safer than she ever had in any church. One evening, as Eli slept, she asked a question that had burned inside her since the first night. Why me? Chaza didn't turn from the fire. When the snow swallowed your voice, he said, it still reached mine. She leaned back, held her child closer. No one's ever listened to me before. He finally met her eyes. They were deaf. The fire snapped between them. Outside, snow fell soft and slow. But this time, Grace didn't shiver. Someone had walked into the storm for her and come back carrying everything she thought she'd lost. The cabin didn't feel like shelter anymore. It felt like the beginning of something. Grace moved carefully now, ribs still sore, but her steps were steady. Eli clung to her like he knew how close he'd come to disappearing. When Chaz returned from the woods, the baby reached for him without fear, and Grace noticed how Chaz's large hands held him like he was something precious. She tried to ask about his past, where he'd come from, who'd raised him. His answers came in pieces. I was a second son, he said once, not the one expected to lead. So I listened more than I spoke. Another time, my mother could braid sweetgrass so tight it'd hold through a storm. Grace treasured those fragments like warm stones tucked into her pocket. She didn't press for more. Instead, one night, with Eli sleeping between furs, she offered her own story. My husband died in a mine collapse. I was 3 months pregnant. They gave me half his pay and a sack of flour. Said that was fair. Chaza said nothing, but he didn't look away. I tried to sew, tried to teach. But no one wanted a widow with a crying baby. Harlan offered me passage west. Said there was work. I didn't know I was the work. She stared at her hands. When he took Eli, I begged God to send someone. I didn't expect it to be you. Chaza stood slowly, added wood to the fire. I was fasting that day, he said quietly, seeking a vision. She looked up. Did you get one? He turned. You. The word sat between them. Equal parts question and answer. Her cheeks warmed, not from the fire, but from something deeper, something she thought had died in the cold. What are you going to do with us? She whispered. Chaza stepped closer. Not what? Where? He knelt beside her and placed a hand over Eli's chest. To someplace no man like Harlan will ever touch again. The place lay beyond the second ridge, past the black pines, where elk fed and no white man dared settle. Chaza called it Tokala's Hollow, named for his uncle, who had vanished there during the Great Starvation, but left behind a stone cabin built with his own hands. It's been empty since I was a boy, he said, but it waits. And when they arrived, Eli bundled to Grace's chest, snow crunching under the mare's hooves. She understood. The cabin wasn't warm. It wasn't grand, but it was right. Chaza opened the door and stood aside. Yours now, he said. Grace stepped in, set Eli down, let him crawl, then turned. Why here? Chaza looked around. Because this land belonged to a warrior who died protecting children not his own. His blood's in the soil. That matters. In the days that followed, they made the hollow livable. Chaza repaired the roof. Grace tanned rabbit hides. Eli laughed again. His tiny voice bounced off the stone like the first line of a hymn. There were no visitors, no wagons, only wind and trees, and the quiet rhythm of 3 people learning each other's breath. But silence was not absence. It was healing. One afternoon, Grace asked if they were safe. Chaza's answer came slow and steady. Men like Harlan don't forget what they lose, but they don't come here without cost. She nodded. She understood what he hadn't said aloud. You fight. I've already chosen my side. That night, sleep wouldn't come to Grace, not from fear, but from a question rising slow and certain in her chest like spring sap under thawed bark. What am I now? Not a widow, not a victim, not just a mother, something else entirely. Someone new. She watched Chaza sleeping beside the fire, his limbs loose, the slow rhythm of his breath calm and steady. Eli was curled against his leg like a pup nestled into safety, and in that flickering orange glow Grace whispered, not a god, not into the void, but to herself, this is my family. She didn't need a ceremony. She didn't need a preacher. She didn't need permission. She just needed that moment to mean it. The next morning, she braided her hair like her mother once did, tight, proud, unshaken. When Chaza looked up and saw her, something passed between them, quiet, unreadable. Then he said softly, "You look ready." Grace nodded. "I am." That year, the thaw came early, loosening winter's grip before February had ended. The air shifted from survival to possibility. Streams sang again, birds returned to the branches, and the scent of thawed pine and wet dirt drifted through the hollow. Grace walked the edges of the land with Eli strapped to her back, collecting herbs Chaza had named, digging roots he'd taught her to cure. Each task, no matter how small, layered ownership onto the life they were crafting. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Still, in the golden hum of new routines, a shadow lingered. She saw it in Chaza's eyes when he came back late from hunting, in the way his gaze swept the ridgelines before he set his bow aside. One evening, Grace asked plainly, "Is he coming?" Chaza didn't answer right away. Then, low, steady, "I think he already has." That night, they doused the fire early. Grace held Eli close while she and Chaza lay on opposite sides of the room, both of them awake, both listening. Around midnight, it came, a snap, a single branch breaking. Too deliberate to be wind. Chaza was already up, arrow notched, eyes fixed on the door. But no one came. Come morning, he found the tracks. Boots, one pair, circling the cabin once. Watching, waiting. Chaza followed them for miles through the snow, then returned, silent, jaw set. "He wants you afraid," he said. Grace's throat tightened. "Will you stop him?" "I already did once," Chaza replied. "Now he wants you to believe I won't again." That day, Grace did something else. She walked into the clearing behind the cabin, lifted her chin to the whispering pines, and began building something with fallen branches and twine. "What is it?" Chaza asked from the tree line. "A fence." "No," she replied. "A marker for him." She took a piece of Eli's old blue blanket, faded, torn, still sacred, and tied it to a carved wooden stake. She drove it into the earth at the edge of the clearing. "He doesn't get to haunt us anymore," she said. "He doesn't get space in here." She tapped her chest. Chaza stood quietly, then stepped forward and placed his hunting knife beside the stake. "If he comes," he said, "he'll see we've already buried him." It wasn't a grave of soil, but something deeper, a declaration, a warning, a line drawn across the land that said, "Asterisk, this life is claimed. This woman is not alone. And this child has two parents now, one by blood, one by oath, asterisk." That night, Grace pressed a kiss to Eli's forehead and whispered, "You're safe." And for the first time since that frozen wagon ride west, she truly believed it. Word traveled slower than wind, but faster than fear. By the time March light touched Ocala's hollow, someone had seen Harlan in Deadwood, drunk, loud, showing off a torn baby bonnet like it was a trophy. Said he had a wife who'd run off with a savage. The man who told it to Chaza had met him near the trading post. He says he's coming to take back what's his. Chaza didn't curse, didn't raise his voice. He simply bought more salt, more flour, then returned to the hollow with quiet urgency. Grace saw the change in him before he even spoke. "He's close," she said. Chaza nodded. "We won't run." That night, he taught her how to fire a bow. Her first shot missed the tree entirely. The second arrow stuck in bark and trembled. "Not bad," he said, "for a preacher's daughter." She smiled at the tease, but tension coiled tight beneath her skin. Still, she kept practicing. They reinforced the cabin, shutter stronger, food store high, escape paths mapped in the trees. Grace fashioned Eli a sling from rabbit fur, so she could carry him fast if it came to that. But deep inside, she hoped she wouldn't need to run. She hoped to stand. Days passed. No sign of Harlan. But the silence didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like the dry stillness before a prairie fire. Then one afternoon, while hanging laundry in the clearing, Grace heard it, a crack, sharp and sudden. Not snow melt. A step, a boot. She turned slowly. There he was. Harlan. dirtier, meaner, eyes yellowed from rot-gut whiskey, a rifle slung low, a grin twisted across his face. "There you are," he drawled. "Thought maybe I buried you two deep in that blizzard." Grace didn't flinch. "You tied me to a tree. Broke our deal. You don't get to rewrite the rules just 'cause you got lucky." He stepped closer. "Where's my son?" "Not yours," she said, voice firm. "Not anymore." He raised a rifle. "You think he'll remember you? A whore, a liar." "No." The voice came from behind him. Chaza stepped from the trees, bow drawn, arrow steady. "He'll remember who saved him." Harlan froze. His laugh curdled into silence. "You again," he spat. "Always hiding behind a woman." Grace moved to stand beside Chaza. "Not hiding," she said, "choosing." Harlan raised a rifle. Too slow. The arrow hit the snow at his feet. Chaza didn't miss. "Leave," he said. "You have no claim here. No name. No place." Harlan looked from Grace, to Eli in her arms, to Chaza's unreadable face, and something in him shrank. No curses. No threats. Just silence. He turned and walked into it. Spring came hard that year. Mud swallowed boots. Winds tore at the cabin seams. But inside, something took root, stronger than weather. Grace no longer walked like someone bracing for pain. She moved with intention. Chaza watched her one morning by the stream, scrubbing clothes while Eli chased sunbeams. "You've changed," she said. She looked up, blinking sunlight from her eyes. "No, I just showed up to who I was." He smiled. "A rare, quiet thing. That day they planted." Grace laid potatoes in the soft dirt near the ledge. Chaza showed her how to layer ash beneath for warmth. Every movement, every seed, every step, they weren't chores. They were declarations. We are here. We are alive. We are building. That night, watching the fire curl upward, Grace turned to him. "Are we just waiting for him to return?" Chaza shook his head. "We've already moved past him. If he returns, he'll find an empty place where fear used to live." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time," she said. "For what?" "To say it." Chaza tilted his head. "Say what?" She met his eyes, her voice calm, but steady. "That this, us, it's not just survival. It's home." He didn't answer at first, just stood and walked to his saddlebag. From it, he pulled a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Inside, a necklace of woven sweetgrass and carved bone, marked with a symbol of Weepa, the bringer of good news. "My mother gave this to me," he said. "Told me I'd know when to pass it on." He knelt before her. No vow, no question, just offering. Grace took it, her heart thudding. She placed it around her own neck. "Then I accept," she whispered. That night, they didn't speak of the future or the past. They simply existed together, not bound by law or church or paper, but by something older, love without shame, truth without condition. In the weeks that followed, neighbors trickled in from the edges of the world. An old Lakota couple bringing berries, a trapper from Chaza's childhood, a Comanche woman who said nothing, only left a carved eagle feather outside their door. Word had spread, not just of the woman who survived a snowstorm, but of the life she'd built after. One day, Grace pointed to a tiny green sprout rising between the rocks. "See that?" she said to Eli, holding his hand. "That's how we grow. Even here." He laughed, a bright sound that filled the hollow like a promise. When Chaza stepped out of the cabin with his hand outstretched, Grace didn't walk to him. She ran. Together, they built their final home, not of stone, but cedar. Beam by beam, at the eastern edge of Tokala's Hollow, where the sun touched first, Chaza carved birds into the wood, deer, a mother and child in profile. Grace painted the inside walls with wildflower dye until they bloomed, even in the depth of winter. It wasn't a cabin anymore. It was theirs. By summer, Eli ran barefoot through the stream, laughing after frogs. Grace taught him the Lakota names for every flower. Chaza tended the smokehouse he'd built with his own hands, humming as he worked. the sound threading through the trees like a heartbeat. They had no clock, no church bell, no town orders, but they had rhythm. They had peace. One morning, a letter arrived, carried by a trapper, from Deadwood. Grace didn't open it for 2 days. When she finally did, her hands shook, not from fear, from memory. It was from a preacher, the one who had once blessed her marriage to the man who sold her soul for drink. Word reached us you survived, it read. Asterisk some wonder if you were taken against your will. I would ask only this. Did you find peace? Asterisk. Grace didn't write back. She took the letter to the fire and watched it burn. That was her answer. Months passed. Then a year. On the first spring morning of their second year, Charles returned from a ridge with his arms full of wild lilies. For you, he said. Grace laughed, brushing a curl from her cheek. What's the occasion? You said once no one ever gave you flowers, he replied. She touched the petals. Then his cheek. No one ever stayed long enough to know I liked them. That evening, they held a ceremony. No guests, no vows, just Eli standing between them, and an eagle feather still resting at their door. Charles pressed his forehead to hers. In my tongue, he said, there's no word for wife that means possession. Only a word that means the one I shelter beside. Then that's what I am, Grace said, and what I'll always be. That night, under sky flooded with stars above Tokala's hollow, Grace stepped outside alone. She looked at the woods, the stream, the hill where the markers still stood, and whispered, I survived you, Harlan, and I became someone. Behind her, Charles's arms wrapped around her waist. Eli's sleepy voice called from inside. Grace smiled, not with relief, but with victory. She hadn't just been rescued. She had rebuilt, and the woman who'd once whispered for help into the snow had become a name spoken with strength. Grace. Please share, and subscribe to support more true heart stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen her there, would you have stepped in too?